Welcome, obviously, to today's webinar. Very shortly we'll be going through a bit of an introduction of Phil and myself about Formers Pro as a solutions partner, and then on to the meat, which is obviously the content, which of course Phil will so lubriciously deliver to us today.
And also, just by the way, we've got a Slido in there. It's the first time we've used one. So if you're interested in getting a bit more involved, get your camera ready. The Slido's really easy. We'll ask just one question to start with, and we'll go from there. So yeah, this is me. Hi, I'm Phil. I'm technical architect at Formers Pro. I did an MSc at Cranfield University back in 1995, and I've been sort of certainly more recently more of an AI optimist as sort of the world has managed to open at the doors. Generative, GPT and all the additional processing that's been available over the years has made that possible. I've been in dynamic space as well since about 2009, and several sort of Microsoft qualifications and the like. I also blog a little bit about this kind of stuff. So there's bits about AI and data on my blog. There's a link at the bottom of that page. And by all means, if you're interested, do catch up with me on LinkedIn. Ping me a questions direct, connect, and let's chat.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Phil. Well delivered. And as everyone can read, that Andrew Wiseman, that's me, part of the commercial team at Formers Pro. But effectively, I am today's host. I will be asking some, I think, quite searching questions of Phil in regards to sort of the importance of what we're talking about today, but also in the wider context. Really, my specialty sits in solving problems for all of our clients that we help at Formers Pro, whether that be charities or commercial entities or whatever it might be. Ultimately, everyone has goals to achieve. Whether that's fundraising or helping people with with obviously the great work that you all do as charities, and ultimately I'll help try and get us there and reach goals without talking too much about the technical solutions needed, but more about how to achieve the goals really in the most efficient way. I have been in the software industry only for a couple of years, so it's quite interesting to see how sort of I guess all of these big companies like Microsoft approach solutionizing and giving people the tools to do what they need to do in their day jobs. But yeah, effectively, I will be your today's host. Touch on a little bit about Formers Pro as a partner. We are a solutions designation partner in business applications, and we're quite an important strategic partner for Microsoft as a big portion of our, I guess, driver in helping our organizations is actually with the tech for social impact. So that's ultimately the charity sector that Microsoft obviously specialize in, and obviously we're all probably aware of on this call. But yeah, effectively, it's to do good with the technology. So it is reaching goals that we all need to achieve with the good technology that Microsoft folk generate and provide for us. So in terms of touching on Formers Pro, we've been running as a business just over 12 years now. In fact, actually, it's a lot more than that. It's now 13 years. So it was founded and is still owned by our founder and CEO, Clem Powell, who ultimately has a huge passion for charity work, not only obviously in his own life, but actually in the company's ethos as well. We have I guess very high accolade of a 95% staff retention rate, and I can honestly say this is a wonderful place to work. Having only been here for 2 years, I think everyone is particularly driven to achieve great things for clients. Across all of our platforms or solutions that we provide, whether that's Business Central, whether that's CRM, CE as people call it, and Azure and development. So yeah, all very good things. We have the US and the North America sort of sector covered with our office over there. The UK, we obviously work with clients also in Europe. We've got some work outside of Europe as well, in Australia, and yeah, we've got lots of the sort of solutions covered with our team, which is ever growing, which is good. Great, fantastic. As you can see there, we're a solutions partner business applications, and obviously that means we are really solely focused on these areas, obviously some of which, as you all know, have already got the Copilot AI, serving up some assistance already.
There's a lot of Copilots out there.
There is, and there's a lot of chat about Copilot, and of course, a lot of noise, which is good and bad. And actually, lots of people will sometimes ask to turn it off. Some people will really want to know how to make use of it. And in fact, we actually run a separate webinar, which I won't go into too much detail today. Phil runs an AI Academy sort of webinar where he will go into the depths of actually how to utilize these tools really well. But yeah, today's obviously he's focused on the not-for-profit and the unconscious bias that might appear in your charity's data. A selection of our clients, I guess, would be remiss of us not to use this as a platform to show all the good work that we do. And obviously there'll be some clients in there that we may well all be familiar of, and obviously some will be attending this webinar today, hopefully. Yep. So yeah. So Microsoft's Tech for Social Impact team have a very clear remit, and that is clearly to do good with their technology and to provide great things for the charitable work that you do, so that you can serve your communities better. There's a big team that are working closely with Performance Pro to maximize all of the incentives that our clients can gain from this. Or would that be the discounts for licensing, or the pre-sales or pre-market engagement incentives, and post-delivery incentives as well? But they do lots of stuff in the background, obviously, with that. I won't go into all of the detail because the representatives from Microsoft obviously do a great job of this, but effectively they've got a good driver in delivering social impacts, positive outcomes with their technology. The discounts that we can all leverage from Microsoft as charity tenants is hopefully quite clear. If it is not, reach out. We can advise on that, and we can talk about that. But they obviously donate lots of money to charitable organisations as well, through either the Microsoft employees and also company matching. But that's a huge number of grants and discounts software in as a service for the non-profit sector. Yeah, we're really proud to be working with them and yourselves.
Yeah, this is the next slide, and I think it's got some of the stuff about the pricing that's available for not-for-profits on things such as Copilot. Obviously, there's a big push from Microsoft for that area, and it aligns relatively closely with what we're talking about today. And hopefully, there's a lot of power underneath that in terms of sort of making a lot of people's lives better. That is ultimately sort of what AI should be used for, certainly in most people's opinion, I think. So I think we've got a Slido. So this is what I mentioned earlier. If you've got a couple of minutes, grab your camera now, point it at the screen, and we're keen to sort of to get it to hopefully angle this a little bit more towards your real issues. And so we're asking what aspect of unconscious bias concerns you most in your organization. Is it all about AI? Are there the machine learning bits and pieces that you're doing that more traditional ML that you have concerns about? Is there anything else within your organization where you feel that unconscious bias may be preventing your organization from doing the best work that it can? So if you've got anything, do throw it in there. Write as much as you like or as little as you like. If it's just one word, that's fine. If there's 2 words, as long as they're polite, that's all good as well.
I guess my first burning question, Phil, while everyone is acting on that Slido, is maybe if you could just explain how, obviously the title of this, how unconscious bias can impact decision making for NFPs and obviously charities alike in their data. Maybe you could just touch on that for me, Phil.
Yeah, sure. Sort of, it broadly aligns with the fact that, once your data is incomplete in any kind of way, if you are automating any kind of assessment based upon that data, then you may have incomplete outcomes or wrong outcomes potentially. And so it's a key item, and it's been something that's been in the machine learning sort of area for a long time. How do we deal with this? Absolutely, and we've got some great stuff coming up on the screen. Mitigation of bias, misleading reporting. Absolutely. Are you getting the absolute truth? Coming originally from a for the CRM background before we ended up in this area, then having one version of the truth and having that truth be accurate is really important, and that obviously clearly affects decision making. And so we're going to be looking a little bit at sources of data and then what tools we have to be able to attack those and actually drive out and see and do analysis and some visualization and see whether or not we do have bias in that data.
Really good, strong one on there, actually. Thanks very much for the person that put that in, his wrong investment decision. Clearly, we all know that you're answering in the most part to your trustees, when you're looking to put money towards a decision, whether that be for new software systems or a new sort of direction or new program for your fundraising activities. Having the wrong data or having perhaps a bias that hasn't really been looked at can in fact lead to the wrong investment decision. So that's a really powerful one to cover off. Thanks, Phil.
So with that, let's talk about what we're going to be talking about today. We'll run you through at a high level what's going on. So we're going to be looking, broadly speaking, at the unconscious bias, broadly at the two different types of AI models that are on the market, really, which is more traditional machine learning, and that encompasses an awful lot of decision tree models and that sort of thing, which are generally referred to as traditional machine learning here. Quite predictive in their nature, so they run through a lot of the data and they build up patterns, and then by throwing data through those patterns, you come out with an equivalent answer and are then able to say, okay, based upon what I've had going on in the past, this is what I would expect to go on in the future. And generative AI, which is more recent, and that allows us to do things with, although I'm not running through any deep examples on some of the the image learning, which is obviously more in the medical domain generally. We've got a couple of examples of how ChatGPT can be analyzed and evaluated. And then we're going to move on towards the end. We're going to dive directly from some of these big tools, such as using Fabric for some of the machine learning, or the AI Foundry for the ChatGPT learning. And we're going to look as well at Excel and look at how Copilot may help you there. So we're trying to cover we're hitting the big stuff first, and then if you don't have that kind of data engineers in your organization, then you can start at a slightly lower level and still get some decent answers hopefully from the data.
Yeah, so actually touching on data then, Phil, I guess one of my big first questions then, I suppose, is data obviously has to come from somewhere for them to analyze and make decisions. So could you touch on some of the common sources of perhaps unconscious bias in data collection and analysis?
Yeah, we're going to look at a couple of examples as we start to go through, but a lot of the data that we're going to have come through it comes from various business systems, clearly, in the historical systems you have, and sometimes that data, the way it comes through, is being collected in odd ways, and that's okay. I think it's important to realize that the data in your organization might be slightly incomplete, but having an understanding of that and then being able to go back and review and change the way that you get your data or modify any pools of data you have is something that we'll be going to be looking at today. So I think let's dive on to the next bit. So data exploration. So this is how it starts fundamentally, and we're going to do a little demo in a second. But where did you get your information? And that's what Andy, with the question Andy was just asking there. Where did you get that information, and where are you then going to choose to put it? And so what we're talking about here is getting those data and loading those into a system that allows you then to look and clean that data and understand that data, visualize, and then go back through that process again until you get a set of data that you can see that there are no biases left in it. And so depending upon the kind of tooling that you have, you're looking for specific fields, protected fields, if you like, across your data set, such as, for example, sex or age or anything quite private data that might skew the outcome of what you have. So, for example, if you were doing a credit card information thing, for example, you would be able to then say, okay, am I always giving credit cards to young males from 25 to 30, for example? And is there a reason behind that? And churn within your own donor base, for example. Is there a reason they're only donating for 3 months at a time and then stopping? And once we've got that data, then we can drill in and try and understand it.
It's obviously really powerful stuff to actually understand what you're looking at. What sort of examples of tools and techniques can sort of help identify, correcting any biases in the data that you might have, Phil?
Well, we're going to start with looking at notebooks, and notebooks are a part of traditional machine learning. They've been around for a long old time. There's tools available in Microsoft Fabric, which used to be called Microsoft Synapse. There are other companies that produce very similar tooling and allow you to manipulate data and modify it using these notebooks. And the notebooks, literally, we'll see one in a second, actually. We're going to do a demo in something called Data Wrangler in Fabric. Fabric is, like I mentioned, is one of Microsoft's big data tools. It's got aspects of SQL type data storage in there, file storage, bits of Power BI, so you can then interrogate that data and visualize it. And also these things called notebooks, which allow us to load that data in and then to do something, called, sort of experimentation. And that's where we take that data and we modify it subtly, and we see whether or not it affects the information within there and allows us to see whether or not there are aspects of bias within it. So with that in mind, let me find my demo experience over here, and we're going to drop that in, and we're going to start looking at that. So welcome to Microsoft Fabric. Like I mentioned, there's a lot available in here. So if we're over in this point, there's all these home here. We're given a lot of tooling. Now, Fabric is an enormous tool. There's lots of data analytics and medallion stuff. So that's where you get information, you modify it, and you do ETL on it. That's transformation of the data, and before you then choose to use that within your business. I'm not going to be able to go through all of this today, unfortunately. It's an enormous area to deal with, but it's something we do with a number of our customers. It's a tool that's very, very powerful. And so what we're going to be doing with it today is we're going to use this notebook, and we're going to load in some data. And I think I've got it also in Excel. I'm just going to bring Excel over for a second so we can get a handle on what we think this data looks like. And here is that data, fairly simple. This is just some test data from Microsoft, and it's basically credit card information and whether or not someone has exited somebody's credit card program. And so what we're looking there is that it's the kind of thing where you can look at churn and whether or not geography, gender, or age, those protected attributes I was talking about earlier, whether or not they affect that. So let's go back into here. I won't go through all of the code in here. A number of you are probably looking at this code and are terrified, and I 100% understand that. Certainly when I started looking at notebooks a couple of years ago originally, I was like, oh my goodness, this is just gibberish. This has become much easier over the last couple of years because of tools such as ChatGPT, Copilot, and Claude, or name your LLM, large language model of poison. And so this now means that instead of knowing all about some of this code, I can actually just ask a GPT to give me the code, and then I work with the outcome rather than worrying too much about the code. So if you're not a developer, this might not be something that interests you directly, but certainly the outcome might be something that you want to go and talk to an organization such as Swarmers to try and get a handle on your data. So what this stuff does is it loads items in, and it loads it into something called a lakehouse. And a lakehouse, if you've ever seen a database, broadly, it's not entirely the same, but it can be represented like a database. And so again, here's that data, and you're looking at this as if this were a database table or a spreadsheet. If if the spreadsheet is more your area, rather than being a SQL jockey, for example. And so what we do is we have to load all that information in. So a lot of this boilerplate here in this notebook, and you can see why it's called a notebook, because we've got little chunks of text, we've got bits of code that we can then choose to run. And when we run that code, it connects up to our lakehouse, and we'll see it doing that. It's connecting and preparing, and hopefully very quickly it's going to run. So we've got about 10,000 lines of data in there. So it's too much for a human certainly to look at and try and infer any kind of bias from it. But as I mentioned at the beginning, anything that you start to get out of this, you do need a subject matter expert to be able to look at sort of the outcome from this tool, and then analyze that and go, okay, does that make sense? Okay, I can see where it's drawn that from. And so The AI, any of these machine learning tools, they are tools to assist you. They are not necessarily going to give you all the answers directly, but they certainly make it a lot quicker than trying to do it any kind of manually or using any other kind of tooling. So we've loaded the data up. We've got some great comedy name, pandas. There we go. That's taken that CSV file and it's given me an output. Getting some error there. Then I need a visualization. Again, this is all boilerplate. Letting it run through. And then we've got a log. And then I want it to display that information. There we go. It took 3 seconds to run. So a lot of these jobs do run very quickly. The fact that I'm doing it here live is indicative of that. But great, straight away, once I have this information loaded into this tool, and I could have run through all these queries very, very quickly, in under a minute or two, once I've got that data, then already I'm starting to get statistics about what's actually in my data. And you could argue, okay, I could get that from a tool like Excel, but then the next few steps we're going to see that it's not something that you could necessarily do quite so easily in Excel. So if we're looking at sort of the balance for these credit card information, we can see that the balance is, and we're already getting histograms about how long the customers have been there and age, for example, across that data set. So all very visual ways of looking at the data, and hopefully that starts to drive out, okay, we've got a lot of age information here right in the middle, but we've got very little information about people over 50. Is that a hole in our data? Is that something we need to focus more on? Is there a way that we can use the machine learning to hopefully fill in the blanks where this data is? We go through. So once we've selected this item, we can use a tool called Data Wrangler. And if I click on this data wrangling button, we're going to select that data frame. It's going to take a little second to get going. And straight away, it gives me a visualization again of that data, very similar to what we were looking at before. Credit score, the age that we were just looking at. And we've got a number of tools over here. So where we have duplicates, where we have missing values, instead of having to write Excel or anything to do that, I can simply click the button, select my target columns where I have my concerns, and then it'll start to create code. So I start doing that, for example, the customer number and surname missing. And it starts to auto-generate for that code. Then when I've worked through and thought I've tidied my data as best as I can hit apply, and that's going to take me back with that code into my notebook. In the best Blue Peter type way, that I've already got this information here. And then I can hit play on there. I can run that code, and it's all going to automatically do that tidy for me. Now, the great thing about all of this, of course, is that if I'm doing that in Excel, these a number of commands that I have to run. Is that going to take time? Yes. Am I always going to have those commands available to me? Now I've got a position where I can grab that data and I can play this through very, very quickly. I can automate it. I can run all of those commands at once, and then I can end up with data. So now that we've got that information, we can start drilling into it a little bit more. So now we're looking at a specific variable, the column that said whether or not someone had exited, that is to say, had they churned. And again, that's often certainly in donor situations is something you need to know about. And then we can eventually build down and create these documents out and these images that give us an indication of the data. And so these documents are giving us, for each of our columns, they're giving us a median value, maximum values, and a look at that data in terms of how broad is it, and do we have good medians? Do we have good maximums? Do they make sense within our data? And then straight away we can see here, for example, our median age is over at sort of 36 or something, and we have very little data available to us here. And so this starts to guide us in terms of, okay, this data set is starting to look as if it's got a certain bias towards a certain age group and a certain credit score. And I think we've also got that starts to point towards potentially what we might want to do with that data and whether or not we need to modify it. We've also got some charts in terms of whether or not the characters have information about them in terms of how much data do we have, for example, on individuals from France, and whether or not they've exited the program. And we can see here that we've got a lot more male bits of information about males who are within the program than we do about females in the program. So again, we're starting to look at biases in this data and thinking, okay, what do we need to do? Do we need to trim our data? Do we need to, is this valid? And these are questions that you need your SME to answer. So I think what we'll do is we're going to jump out of this. We're going to talk a little bit more about something called synthetic data. So let's come back here.
Just while you jump back out, there's a good question actually from one of the participants. It said about working in Python. Is it default or is it a preference?
It's a preference. You can change that on the notebook. If we jump back to the notebook, we have a number of different languages we can use: R, Python, Scala, HTML. You wouldn't run this code in HTML, but you can certainly change this, and you can also install other languages and use those as well. But I think certainly I'd argue that 50-60% of these notebooks are produced, and a lot of the examples out there as well use a form of Python generally. So let's talk a little bit about fairness. So I mentioned the magic word there, the protected attributes. What is it within your data that you're concerned about that you may be missing out on? And certainly a lot of the time it may be your data is biased towards particular age groups or particular, sex groups, male or female, and you need to be able to identify that and see whether or not you're producing answers which are only based on a small subset of data. So we need to analyze that data, and then you can, like I mentioned there, we can start to do that within a tool such as Fabric and those notebooks. When you've got that data, we need to define the metrics that we're going to be working with here. So are we looking purely at doing an analysis of predictive models? And if you've worked with a marketing tool, for example, and we look at things such as segments, it may well be that the segments effectively within your data are slightly small or slightly misdistributed, and that's an important thing to chase. We also got an issue where are the errors that we have in our data, are we always getting false positives out of them or false negatives? And so what we continue to do is we evaluate, adjust, and monitor that data by modifying it. And so what we need to do, as we're going to move on to the next slide here, is we're going to try to force fairness. And this sounds a little bit crackpot sometimes, but what we're doing here is we're looking at the data, and there's an example over on the right hand side. We're talking here about reweighting, but the example here is that we have a female yes group that is very much slightly underrepresented within our data set. We've got a total of 10, and we have 2 females who have said yes, for example. And so what we need to do is effectively amplify their output in order to force fairness on them. And so you can look at the maths directly, but because it's a smaller number, you can see that needs to be amplified. And so by a factor of 1.5. The male yes group is quite a large amount out of the total group. And so that needs to be decreased slightly in terms of its output within our model. So what we do is we modify our data set. And so that when we do training on it, that the outcome is that, sort of these data sets which are underrepresented are slightly amplified. It may be that you feel that this is not giving you a true, view of the world, but within your domain, you have to do this and then see whether or not that gives you a slightly fairer outcome or one that's more accurate. Or alternatively, we need to go back to our data set and see whether or not we can get more information. So another way of forcing fairness is to do something called debiasing. And an example here is there's a number of different debiasing techniques, but one here is called adversarial debiasing. And it's something where effectively you've got a set of data, and that's over here on the left-hand side, and you're doing a certain amount of training on that data. Now, in this example, the model being used is actually a neural network, and then there's this adversarial model. Now, what's actually happening here is that this may be biased, for example, towards, sort of a particular group, then that protected set of attributes, be it, through their sex or their age. And then what we do is, at the same time as we're training this model, we're training another model, and the other model is being used using the output of the first model and our protected attributes. So the way that this works is that I wrote it down because it's so what we're doing is model 1 is trained to do, for example, a loan approval, and model 2 is trained on it and the output of that data. And then if model 2 can always predict the outcome of model 1, then you know that the data is flawed, that there is bias within the data. If this second neural network or this second model cannot predict what this one is going to do, when this one is trained specifically to look for that protected attribute, for example, someone's age, then that's at that point you've managed to modify this information to the point that there is no longer a bias in it. I'm willing to run through that again if somebody asks, but
that sounds like it's AI checking AI homework, Phil.
It is AI checking AI homework, absolutely.
Okay.
And it's something we get throughout a lot of, because AIs are so big and they're working with so much data, then there's an awful lot of it, and we're going to see in the generative examples where AIs do end up checking AI's homework. And as long as they're trained in a particular way, it's perfectly valid. But it's certainly initially it's a strange concept to try and get your handles on. So once we've reduced that fairness, then it might be that we still find, because of our lack of data, that we need to get more data. And it may be you go back to your subject matter expert and back to the business and the rest of the organization, go, can we get more data? And they say, no, we only have this small amount. And so what you can do is you can synthesize new data. There's a great acronym there, SMOTE, synthetic minority oversampling technique. But ignore all that stuff. Again, there are libraries available within the notebooks that will do this kind of work for you, that break your data into smaller subsets, that will then synthesize the data based on those subsets, as long as you give it the information. So I guess all we're doing here is we're flagging the fact that there are a number of tools out there that can do this kind of work for you. And the interesting thing here is that sort of the purple group in this top chart here are clearly underrepresented. There's very few dots. There's some interesting outliers up here. And then what the synthesizing of the new data can do is actually create additional data points for you. And so there's some resampling there with SMOTE, and there's also another great acronym over here, and another sampling tool over there. And you can see that they have subtly different outcomes based upon the underlying mathematics. So I mentioned those are available in things like Python libraries. There are risks, obviously, with coming up with this new data. There could be a lack of realism. And again, there's an assessment that you have to do once you've done this resampling. You do need to depend on the real data. And then consequently, from the step on from there, is that there are privacy concerns with that data as well. So if issues with GDPR, for example, you have concerns, the resampling isn't coming up with completely new data. It's looking at the particular set of data points you're interested in and expanding upon them. And so, again, it comes back to, you need to then look at that data and go, does that fit? Does that give me a better output? And sort of ultimately, that's the goal in this situation. So we're moving on now to generative AI. Also, we're using some big heavyweight tools here. We're going to use the AI Foundry, which is a rebranded Open AI Azure tool set that's been around for a while, but there's been some additional changes to cover off a lot of the new generative tools. And we're going to look a little bit at the evaluation that's available there. The key terms we're going to try and understand are precision and recall. And so precision is how many predictions is the AI making that are correct, and recall, which is how many items in the data set are correct that it's coming up with. And then we've also got, based upon that information, you can calculate something called an F1 score, which is a balance of the two. So it might be that you train an AI and its precision is great, that is to say that it's getting predictions right, but its recall is relatively low. And then that adjusts its F1 score. So what we're doing is we're looking to get a more balanced view of the world with this F1 score. So with that in mind, let's go and have a look at AI tool that's available at the AI Foundry now. So I have, this is OpenAI, Azure AI Foundry. I'm using an OpenAI model. Here it is, it's Chat 3.5 Turbo, so it's a couple of years old now. And what I've got is I've got some additional data that I've given it. And so by creating a file, and I use this for a demo that I did as part of our AI Copilot agents demonstration a couple of weeks ago, we've got some information and it's about cocktails. And again, I even got an AI Copilot to create the list of cocktails. And they have all these pricings in them and a little bit of blurb that the AI has come up with. But then what I'm keen on doing here is seeing whether or not, when I'm talking to my AI, it has its own general knowledge. But once it's got this information, then we want to see how accurately it recalls that information. And so there's a couple of different ways we can do that. So let's just ask this thing to start with. There are no cocktails under 15. Interesting. The old-fashioned is the next. I'm not sure that's entirely true. So it's interesting. It's come up with stuff, but I know for a fact that there is bits of data in there. So already I'm starting to think, has this been mistrained? Is this data not been broken up in the right way? And so we need to do an evaluation of that. And luckily, there's a tool that allows us to do evaluations. So I've already done some evaluations on this 3.5 model previously, and we can see that we have certainly some issues in terms of the quality of the data we're getting back. I have this. I also created a file in order to ask the question, and I can see that my model is not necessarily using my data correctly. These values of coherence and similarity are relatively low. I would expect them to be quite high. It's quite a small data set. If we go through evaluation, I did an evaluation using a different methodology, and I used more of an AI tool to do that. And I'd used again a slightly different deployment, so that means I'd used a different file and a different AI. And what we should hopefully see here is that its coherence, its groundedness, and its relevance were much higher this second time round. So, once you've got one of these AI tools, then it's not just a question of just going, well, I hope it gets it right. You can test it. You can run evaluations against it. And again, there's some AI testing AI that's available in here as well as being able to come up with questions yourself against the data and check for those things. And it's an important thing to realize that you're not just throwing an AI out there and letting it do an Air Canada. Air Canada very famously last year had a chatbot that started to make stuff up when people were asking it questions. And there's a lot of other tooling available in here. We have safety and security, so we can then look to see whether or not your AI is, if it's starting to spit stuff out, you can put deliberate blocks in the way so that it evaluates its own output against one of these other models in order to be able to check whether or not you're doing things potentially you're doing things unsafely or certainly potentially delivering incorrect data, which is one of these key worries about some of the generative models.
That's one of the big concerns, I think, Phil, certainly with most of the industry, and it's how much is the output of these AIs actually to be trusted. And of course, I'm not suggesting anyone on the call would simply sort of act on the basis of what these generative tools spit out, but it is interesting that there are tools out there, ironically, for the AI models to check themselves. And you can see obviously that Phil showed there is that some of those models are not as good as others, in which case you've got a little peace of mind that you can check it. But yeah, it's there's no replacement still for the subject matter expert, and obviously it is very important, we think, and certainly the clients we work with, to have business analysts and data analysts within organizations, or find a good partner like Foremost Pro to be an SME and train you guys on how to really run your data and make the most of it, with a smattering of AI to help along the way.
So you've looked at all that and you've gone, oh my goodness, I now need to go and spend a fortune on Azure experts. How am I ever going to afford that? And the initial answer is, well, hold on, you don't necessarily need to go all the way to doing that kind of work immediately. And so we've got aspects of Copilot in Microsoft Excel, and there's some very powerful tooling. I don't know how many people on the call are Excel jockeys in a big way. There's a lot of very powerful stuff in here, and the Copilot and the advanced analytics available in Excel is certainly very, very, very strong as well. So during the first demo, I was going through, and you may or may not have noticed that there was this concept of data frames, and that's broadly speaking thinking about tables, if you like, in SQL terms, or named ranges effectively within Excel. And so think about those in the same way. So we've got a demo where we're going to do some Excel advanced analysis. I've got a number of prompts over here. One of the impressive things I've always found about any of this, the Copilot work, is being able to ask English language questions of this. Sort of diving in and taking code apart and taking data apart takes a huge amount of headspace, certainly for me anyway. And if I can get a shortcut to that, if I can get some insight into data through Copilot, then I think it's more than worthwhile. So I asked it, what does this data represent? And it's talking about customer information and whether or not the customer has exited. Obviously, the AI doesn't know what this data is, but it's had a pretty good stab at giving you English output in terms of, balancing what this information means. And it's also great, produced a chart as well. Balance, we can see here, the sum of balance, and it starts to give me a viewpoint of the data. Now I've started to see what the information's there. I can continue to ask questions, and what I do is I choose to use, so it's straight away about customer information. So from now on in my conversation with Copilot here, I'm going to try and use similar language to the information it's got, because fundamentally what it's doing is it's building entities under the hood, and entities, objects, tables, however you choose to view them. It's looking at building some kind of model internally that we can query. If I'm using the same language as that, similar syntax, if you like, then we can hopefully get to closer understanding, and I'll understand what it's saying, and hopefully that the type of language that I'm using will also be correct. So about 20% of customers have exited, and it's produced a pivot table. And if I choose to, you can actually look at that pivot table, and then you can say, okay, tell me how you came up with that pivot table. And Copilot in Excel is fantastic at telling you, okay, I've written a function, and this is the reason why I've done it. One of the things I was going to ask it, I don't think I'll bother now, is how many rows are missing data? There are no missing rows of data in here, but I think when I asked originally Copilot, it came up with a function, and now I wouldn't have written that function very quickly off the top of my head, but certainly if it's great that instead of having to go and Google the internet, and I can actually get some information directly from within the tool itself. So what we're going to do now is we're going to switch to advanced analysis. So it's trying to build up a set of data frames internally, and we're going to get hopefully an additional sheet and all of the Python code that is generated. And so again, that goes to answer that question that we had earlier. Python is effectively the go-to language in terms of this kind of tooling. So it's busy at the moment, and then it's going to, what I can start to do is actually ask it questions in English and get answers in terms of Python. And then those Python scripts are generally, more importantly in this case, are actually spat out onto the screen. So what we've got is I've asked it the count of females with a low tenure who've exited, and it's given me an answer. And then it gives me additional questions that I can start to query into. And what I can do is I can continue to ask questions in English and get answers. So compare the average tenure of customers who have exited and those who have not. So great. Now it looks like the average tenure. So the tenure customers who have left the program and those who haven't, that is to say, potentially, donors who have churned and those who haven't churned. This isn't showing me there's a great deal of difference within my data. So that starts to point me towards, in terms of biases, thinking, okay, my data is quite well collected. And that I've got, sort of, if I'm looking at people who may have rolled out of a program or who are no longer, donating, then I've got reasons, hopefully, and a good group to compare them against in order to be able to hopefully generate some understanding about that. Here's an interesting question. Based upon customers, and again, I'm using the term customer. It may be because in your data that they are listed as donors, but it's just the terminology that the underlying data set has. Fantastic. So what it's done, hopefully, it tells you in here, it'll say that it wants to do some feature encoding. Now, this ran on the same data set a couple of days ago, and it wasn't asking for this kind of work. And so it's talking about encoding here. So what that means is that the data where you have, for example, names such as country names, for example, in this one, geography or gender, what you do is you map those across into numerical values. So you might use 1 for Germany, 2 for France, 3 for Spain, for example, and that makes it easier for the maths when you're talking to the AI. So what it's done, at least here, is it's given me a preview anyway, and I've got customer IDs and the probability of them exiting the program. And so I can then take this information, apply it into the underlying data set, and it'll give me, I can then look and see, okay, there is a very high probability of this customer wanting to leave. And so I can then choose to drill into that query and try and find out, okay, what is this customer doing? What is, what has changed? And look deeper into hopefully any of the data we have on that customer. Okay.
That's pretty powerful stuff, Phil.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And of course, whilst it's not perfect, it's clearly showing that that it's still an assistive tool, and I guess it doesn't negate the need for an SME or a subject matter expert for all of this, whether that be internally or externally as looking for a partner.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we are at the end almost of this demo, and so I think from this we can jump into whatever we can jump straight into Q&A if you like. So what we've got here is we've got a great question really that you would want to ask, and so it's come up with talking about how it might use to evaluate the model, and then it's given the steps that it might want to do, and then more importantly it started to come up with the actual data as well, and based upon that it said, okay, we've got that precision and that recall, and those are the two buzzwords that we were talking about earlier. And in this case, it says for male customers, its precision is 0.57, but the recall looks like it's quite low. And so if we've got a lower recall, and remember the recall is where it's looking at the data and gone, do we actually have that information? we can see that recall is quite low. The value should be, if it was high, it would be above 0.8, closer to 1. When it's low, it's closer towards 0. And so our precision and our recall is better on some of these older customers, but it does look as if the model shows a lower recall, indicating a bias with predicting exits for these groups. So the male customers and the young customers. And so that's hopefully a nice way where you can go, okay, I've looked at this data. I haven't had to go and jump into Azure to do it. I've just pointed Excel at it, and it's given me a pretty good go at that data without having to become a machine learning expert.
Yeah, fantastic, Phil. Just have a quick one. I think just some of the key takeaways would be great. Thanks.
So yeah, like we illustrated there, tooling is available across the MS stack. You can go and look at AI Foundry. It's a hugely impressive tool set, but there's a lot in there and a lot to learn about Azure. So it'll be asking you questions about going and creating things in Azure. So you need Azure accounts. You need to have understandings of permissions and things like that. So it can be a bit heavy. It might be that a tool like Copilot Studio is close to what you want to do if you're doing generative AI, because it's much simpler to work with. We looked at machine learning across Fabric, and again, there's a lot more going on there, and there's a lot of stuff that is creating again in Azure under the hood, something you're going to have to be aware of from a cost perspective. Whereas if you want to, you can bring that down by jumping into some of the simpler tools, such as Copilot Studio that we've looked at before, or looking as we did there at Excel. And that gives us, I think, some great answers. And last but not least, make sure that you've got a subject matter expert. So don't just start looking at this and going, it kind of says that. Does that make sense? I don't know. I'll just go with it anyway. Always have a second set of eyes. Copilot is a co-pilot. It is not the pilot. You are, and make sure that you use that.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.